Okay, I want to start with a demo right away. This is an app called Papercube by Peter Bergstrom, and here it is. This is an experimental tool to help you navigate through when you find the relationships between research papers, which have there we go. It's because I'm how about that? Well, totally. All right, here's what we'll do. I'm going to spin myself around. Okay, so this is a tool for exploring academic papers. As you know, papers with their citations and the authors, it's a really interesting problem space because the documents have such rich metadata about connections to other documents. So Peter made this tool using the framework I'm going to talk to you about called SproutCore. All right, so I already did a search by author name, which the app is cached here, just in case there was a network lag. But so I looked for all the authors whose last name is Smith, and you can see this second one here. This paper has got 4 authors, and it's been cited 78 times. So this is a really good one to show off what this tool can do. So you can see right away, as soon as I made that selection, whatever data this app already knows about starts loading. I have a kind of a slow connection here, which under normal demo circumstances would be like kind of a bummer, but it's actually totally perfect for what I want to talk to you about. So as far as I'm concerned, this could take like 5 more minutes to load, but we can move on from here. Okay, so it's right away you got to see whatever the local app knew about, and then the rest under the covers, the app is going back to the server to get as much data as there is to know about this object. And we don't have the source code for this. I mean, we could look and use an inspector. We don't have it all nicely formatted, but I mean, I bet you'd be really shocked at how little work the developer needed to do to make all this kind of work, but based on my experiences with it. So that's pretty cool. I think everyone can see how that applies to some of the problems you're trying to solve, but it's got some other pretty interesting features. So let's look at a graph view. All right, that's pretty cool. But this is only showing me one level of connection. Let's dial it up a little bit. Show me 3 levels of connections. So going back to the server, getting more objects. I don't want to tax this too much. We can zoom in. I think we even have if we want to save it for later. I don't want to do too much because I don't know all the commands. I don't want to break something here, but that's a pretty noisy graph. So let's say I don't care about papers that have been. I only want to see things that have been cited more than 10 times. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so that's what I wanted to start off with here. Oh, looks like I lost Keynote. No problem. Okay, so while I'm waiting for my slides to load back up, what I wanted to point out a couple of things about that app. Here we go. It's coming back. This whole display here is very fast and fluid. You notice that? Oh. Man, I've angered the demo gods. I'm really sorry. I'm telling you, I'm actually, we're going to get this back on track here. All right. Awesome. So the things that I really like about this application and why I wanted to show it to you is, first of all, it's very fast and fluid. I mean, it just had a very native feel to it. It didn't feel like I was using a traditional web app. It was very much on the far right of the spectrum that Francisco drew for us yesterday. It's clearly the exact kind of thing that we've been talking about for 2 days here. So usually I spend some more time explaining why it's a good idea to use JavaScript for this, how it's the future, but you guys already are totally up to speed on that. It's web native. There's no plugins involved with that to make that app work. It's all HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and SVG. And another thing that's great about it, what kind of makes it all work, is that the client has a lot of local agency. It's not the server isn't rendering HTML the server doesn't care at all what the client's displaying to you. I mean, there's actually no reason In fact, the server is not worried about the UI in any way. The server is providing a service. It's just returning JSON. I just ran a sniffer on here. So there's nothing to stop any of us from writing a completely different client with a different framework to do other things with this data. And won't bother Peter in the slightest. In fact, to borrow a code snippet from my product, from Other Inbox, we have a little bit more lines of code here, but I have an action. That's basically the entire core of our app. Like if something broke with this, it would cause a whole lot of problems for our clients. I just have a class that I initialize a class with some parameters that the user has passed, and when I turn it into a hash, that gives me back an object graph, which I then convert into JSON. So of course the big epiphany that I had here, which I'm a little bit late to the party, or really late to the party, is like, well, I'm going to all this trouble. What am I doing? I'm constructing a document. I'm just converting to JSON. Well, I should probably be finding some way to just have this JSON already and kind of cut out the middleman. But that's a completely separate talk. The fact is, this is just really clean looking. I think we can all see the appeal of this, and it's a million times better than what I had before. When I was trying to make one of those apps on the far right of the really rich interactive app, but I was using the techniques of something in the middle of that spectrum. Like I was just using partial page updates. I had to use all this glue code. I had a million different controller actions and custom JavaScript mixed with RJS, and it was just really a bear to maintain, and the users hated it. So my name is Mike Subelsky. I'm here to give you an introduction to SproutCore. This is a really incredible audience to be speaking with, and I just want to make clear, like, I am not a framework author. I didn't invent SproutCore. I'm just a fan of it. I'm just somebody that I co-founded this company, Other Inbox. We needed something like SproutCore. We needed to create a rich experience in the browser that felt like the desktop, and this really answered the bill. So I've only made this one thing with it, and so I want to get as deep and technical as I can, but you may have other questions that I'm just going to frankly admit that I don't know the answer to, because I'm just out there like you guys grinding, trying to make a product. So we've been talking about this already. The near future, really the present. We're going to move all the processing back to the client as much as we can. We're going to move presentation to the client. We're going to move the edge all the way out to your browser. And so you've already heard about these projects like Titanium, TaffyDB, Cappuccino, and O3D, and PhoneGap. There's all these active efforts out there that are trying to do that. And so SproutCore is very much of a piece with all of these ideas. And so we have these apps that do these kinds of things. You've already heard examples of them. So Apple has MobileMe. That's their effort to move their desktop apps into the cloud. We heard about 280 slides yesterday. I just showed you Papercube, and hopefully we're worthy to be considered in this pantheon of products. So the problem is they're desktop-like, but they're never going to be like real desktop applications. It sounded like from the PhoneGap talk that that's a future that people are working towards, and maybe someday we'll get past that. But there's still this here really contains a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity, and it's this which brings us here today. So because these are cloud applications, right? This is like a super simplified version diagram of our architecture, which I stole from the AWS blog. So the problem when you're building an app in this way, a client, is that there's always going to be this latency there. You saw how perfectly that worked out when I showed you Papercube. All the data wasn't available right away, but because of the way JavaScript works, you can't write your apps in a way where you allow an open network connection to freeze everything up for the user. You know about all the threading problems. So this is a pretty unique problem for building a desktop app that is completely cloud aware. And this latency issue is part of that. That's something that it's a big challenge. Also, the client right now doesn't have all that much storage. I mean, we're all familiar with some of the options that are out there, but you can't really expect anything greater than SQLite 5 right now if you're just planning to use web technologies. Also, your app is running inside of the browser, and I couldn't find one that also included Chrome as this beautiful, keep everybody happy trilogy, but you could just insert it here in your mind. So there's things that the browser is really good at. It's really good at rendering HTML. As you guys know, you feed it a long string of HTML text, it will appear instantly. But they're bad at touching the DOM. You want to avoid the DOM as much as you can. The JavaScript that we use is single thread. I mean, there's manifold limitations that we're well aware of. So the SproutCore framework is designed to work within those constraints and play to the strengths of the browser so that you can build a desktop app that works in the cloud. So it borrows patterns from Cocoa, some of the really tried and true venerable ideas from that framework that have made it last for 20 years, but it doesn't use the same API. So I was talking to the creator of SproutCore, Charles Joly, and this is his quote. They asked themselves, how would you build Cocoa for the web browser if you could rewrite it from scratch and throw away all the stuff that was out of date or old or just didn't really apply? It also borrows patterns from these other projects, from jQuery and Ruby and Python and Prototype and Rails. And what first appealed to me about it, really, being coming from like the web app server side, was the affinity I felt with it from Rails, because putting these apps together felt a lot more like configuring components and less like writing a whole bunch of code. And that just was familiar to me, being a Rails person. So, I mean, I think it's interesting to note that when Apple made MobileMe, they didn't port Cocoa to the web. They used SproutCore. And that is how I became aware of it, because last summer, we were, less than a year into building our product, and we deal with email, and so the users really expect that to be much more responsive than anything else I had ever worked on. And I saw these apps, and I was like, I just knew that is exactly what I want. I want to be able to have something that feels very native and fluid and has a lot of features, but that wasn't a complete pain to write and maintain. Also, like when Apple came out with the SDK for the iPhone, they made a derivative of Cocoa called Cocoa Touch. And I couldn't really, when I was trying to find a pithy graphic for Cocoa Touch, this is the best I could do. That's really cool. I found that on Flickr. So, like all these ideas, this is all the broth from which SproutCore emerges. So I'm going to talk kind of briefly about all the features that it comes with, because I feel like we've already covered a lot of this ground, but just to show parity, I thought I would mention it. And the way I wanted to explain it was like, let's think for a second, what could we build with these technologies? Not just with SproutCore, but anything that lets you use web native technologies in this way, like just free our minds for a second. And these are some of the things that I came up with. And the asterisks are, like, once I made this slide and came here, people started telling me about, like, oh, well, did you know? So for example, like Rich Kilmer said he's made a video editing app with SproutCore, and it uses a Flash plugin just for the video part. And for IDE, the core team for SproutCore is working on an IDE that would work similar to the interface builder that Francisco showed you. And I saw that with like John's demonstration of the Guitar Hero app. I don't know as much about animation and graphics and things like that, but I feel like, boy, I'd really like to spend a weekend trying to do that in SproutCore and see what would be different or better, because some of the core technology underneath of SproutCore is really designed to make the browser as fast as possible and deal with some of those timer problems and event handling. I feel like it might fit in really well with what he was trying to do with the guitar game. So I leave that as an exercise to the reader. So if you wanted to make one of these things with really rich interaction, what would you need? I came into this very naively thinking, I've been doing web apps for a couple of years. I'm a total ninja, no problem. Well, you actually need a lot. You need what desktop developers have always had, what they've really come to expect. So these are all the things that SproutCore gives you, like keyboard management and focus and drag and drop and MVC, and it has a build system and a testing framework. And I'm trying to go quickly so I have time at the end I can show you any of these things, discuss any of these. But to me, the really cool feature that if you don't remember anything else from my talk about the thing that's really was an eye-opener for me and like changed my programming life is bindings and observers. So that's the one, that's the feature I want to dwell on, and I think all these other ones people have already talked about. Okay, so binding, it's really 3 different components in one that make this work. It's key value coding, key value observation, and bindings. All right, so the reason why these are a big deal is because they're what help you avoid glue code. To make something like Papercube, you have a lot of things that have to be synchronized. A lot of people need to be notified about changes to different objects. And if you don't have a framework doing that for you, you have to write it yourself. And it's really nasty. I looked at some of my old code for the original version of Other Inbox. And I don't even want to put it up there because it's so bad. But you can imagine, oh, if I want to destroy an object, I have to remove it from a hash somewhere. I have to decrement a counter of the total objects. I have to make sure the DOM element representing that object gets removed. And it's just terrible stuff. You guys have all been there. So here's how it saves you time, saves you from writing all that awful code. Key value coding. It just means from now on, anytime you want to access a property or change a property on a JavaScript object, you're going to use a get or set. It's as simple as that. You can do this. It's possible. But you would be ill-advised to do it. Because by using key value coding, it gives you a chance to register other pieces of code that want to be notified when there's a change to that object. So that's called key value observation. So here's my example. You have this collection of objects down here. SproutCore comes with a local database called SC-Store. And the API of it is very familiar. It looks a lot like TaffyDB. So I decided to excise the parts where I show you the store because you've already seen a very awesome implementation of that same idea. So here's the store. I got all my contact objects. And here is the actual piece of the view that I want to affect. This is just a string of HTML. And it's represented in the code by a list item view. So the demo that I'm going to be showing you is just a really simple contacts address book application. So ultimately, we want to change something over here. We want to cause a change which gets reflected in the view, and we don't want to write a ton of glue code. We just want it to happen automatically so we can get on with solving the actual problem. So to make this work, you have a controller called, in this case, the contacts controller, which represents a collection of objects. In this case, I have it just showing you all the contacts, but you could easily, one of the things that the controller does is constrain which things are being represented on the screen. So, from the Papercube example, there's probably some kind of controller called articles that is the list of articles that you've selected or the container for the articles that you've searched for. Okay. So that's like a master controller. It contains all the things that would be in a whole list of objects. So then there's the detail controller, which just represents one particular contact. The content of the contact controller is bound to the selection property of the contacts controller. So my contacts controller, its content is a collection of contact objects. I probably need to get rid of this alliteration and change it to something else, but that's fine. We'll pass on. A contacts controller has a selection of all the things I know about which one is selected. Where should it be highlighted so the user can tell what they've selected. That gets used as a value for the contact controller, and this list item view, the only way it knows what it should display is it's bound to the content property of the contact controller. And I'll talk about properties in a second. So there's a little bit of code in here that says, okay, I want you to take the name of the contact that I'm bound to, and I want you to display it wrapped in H2 tags. Okay, so the magic happens with now we want to do something. We want to change this particular contact. We want to change the name. I guess it would be first name. We want to change your first name to Sarah. Okay, so because all these objects in the model and the view and the controller and these separate layers of your application, they've all registered to receive notifications just by saying they're all bound without you having to do anything except express that binding. When I type this change in, or when I make that happen, it flickers through. Does everybody see the animation there? I worked pretty hard to get that right. So, all right, so then the result is this just changes. And you didn't have to do anything except write object set name Sarah. So that's the big deal. When I saw that, like from here flows all sorts of amazing insights. Is really cool. So the third part of this puzzle, the bindings, that's these connections here. And you don't usually have to create bindings yourself. That gets done for you by the framework when you are configuring these components. All right. Any questions about what I've talked about so far? All right, so now I'm going to jump back into demo time, and I think I'm going to mirror my screen this time so I don't get seasick. Okay, so one moment here. Hopefully the resolution works. Okay, so this is the app that running that I've been showing you. This is the contacts application. Over here, this is the contacts controller is what's backing this list of contacts up. And I'll look at the code in a second. Then we have a detail view here that's bound to that contact controller. Does that make sense? Everybody following me? Okay. So let's actually do the thing that I was showing you. So first of all, when you create one of these apps, you have you get an application object. This is like the only thing that gets added to your namespace other than the SproutCore object. So what I'm doing is I'm going to my application and I'm saying, all right, now I'm going to talk to the contact model. And I want to say, all right, contact model, I want to do a query. I want to find the person whose first name is Michael. All right, and this is one thing I don't like about the WebKit developer tool. It doesn't, in Firebug it resolves it, but so I hope somebody fixes that, or maybe I'll have to. Anyway, that gives me back a particular contact object. So now I'm going to use the key value coding to actually, let's see if I got the object that I thought I asked for, and it worked. So I asked for somebody whose first name was Michael. I got back a contact object. Indeed, their first name was Michael. And I can do other things. Get their last name. I think that, yeah. So that proves that what I got back was a contact. Okay. So now let's do something a little more ambitious. So this time, I want to change the last name to something else. All right, so watch the list item with one eye and watch the detail view here with the other eye. All right, or just take note of it, and then after I change this, you can just compare. All right. So it just changed. The list item changed, and this here changed. So let me just show you the code that actually makes that work. I'll resize this. I'm going to do a tour of why the code is organized this way in a second, but I want to more get into the magic of these features here. So here's the master controller, and there's actually almost nothing in here that you need. This is they have a pretty heavyweight documentation system, which I usually I take all this out. But this stuff in here, that's just optional configuration data. You don't really even need this at all. But that, for certain apps, you want to be able to select multiple things, and you want to be able to have a null selection. There's some startup code. Most of this is, oh, by the way, I also should say, I'm showing you, this is like a 0.9 app. SproutCore is in 1.0, the release candidate is out, and some of the APIs changed, so anything that kind of looks bad and ugly in here, I'm just going to blame on it being 0.9, but since I'm living in a 0.9 world, I don't feel comfortable presenting that stuff, but it just makes the syntax a little bit nicer. So anyway, this is what kicks off everything. We get a collection of contact objects, and we set the master controller. Its content property gets set to that collection. That's the gist of it. For example, you don't have to do this anymore in 1.0. Okay, but that's it. There's really no other code required in your controller. For free, this already knows about how to handle multiple selections, and it can handle keyboard events, all kinds of other cool things like that. Reordering objects, you get all that for free. I mean, you still have to implement the code where you need to do something about it if the user reorders the items in the list, but you don't have to worry about removing it from one place and inserting it somewhere else. You get that for free. So then we have this detail controller And again, the real, that's actually the main meat of it is right here. What is the contacts detail controller? What does it want to know? It just wants to know where to get its content from. So that's a binding to the selection property of the contacts controller. So I can do contacts, what's this one called? Master controller. I'm going off script here. So that's the collection of objects. It's not that interesting. Let me get the selection. That looks like a bug. So what I'm doing is, yeah, I'm getting, so that's the binding that the detail controller is taking advantage of, the selection property of the master controller. And it's coming back as an array, which it really shouldn't do. Or if the master controller was written differently, it would be aware of the fact that it only ever selecting one object. So we could have it return a single object if we wanted to. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to show you would be the model. This is a property, which I'll delve into in a second, but there's no schema, there's no anything special you have to do to a contact except name it and say what it is. This is an example of a property in SproutCore. So this is like a special case of KVO. It is super common, so there's a helper for it. And the idea here is, suppose I have a computed property. It's not something that gets created when this object is instantiated. It's something that you compute by, in this case, concatenating two other properties of the object. Well, by calling the property helper there at the end, you're telling SproutCore, all right, here is a function that other people can observe. You can register to get notified when this changes. And furthermore, you should recompute me. I care about the value of these two other properties. So if first name or last name change, this gets recomputed automatically. So that's what made the list item there on the far left work. But then I'm sort of getting ahead of myself. So what wires all this up is the body.rhtml file. And this is the thing that is most different in 1.0. And if we have time at the end, I will show you an example of a much nicer version of this. Because in this version, we use Ruby helpers. But in SproutCore 1.0, it's all JavaScript. But the idea is basically the same. You're not having to write so much HTML in here. You're using these helpers, which generate most of the code for you. It's just that in the next version, you won't have to use Ruby at all. But the reason I'm showing this to you is this is what actually shows the user something. So this is the most interesting part of the app as far as I'm concerned. So to make that list work over there, I'm taking a pre-built object that comes with the framework called the list view, and I'm binding. The content comes from the arranged object property of master controller. And we didn't have to. Arranged object is a special way to show the collection, but that's a behavior we get for free with the framework. I didn't have to define that. And the selection, we're telling list item, all right, we want you to highlight, put a little purple bar on one of the objects in this collection, and you can find it by getting the selection property of the controller. So does that make sense? Am I going too fast? All right. Let's see. I didn't show you this, but we also have a split view here, and this is one of the things that gets better and faster because they've rewritten the view system like 3 times. Probably since this demo was created. So this actually, you'll be able to do even more things. And that's really all you need to do. You have to design the other 2 views carefully, but to turn on list views, you basically just, that's essentially it. Not much more to it than that. Here's what like an individual form item looks like. And there's the binding. All right, we want the first name text field to get its value. We want you to bind to the detail controller first name. But you notice there's no first name property on the detail controller, right? The framework is just smart enough to know, okay, if I don't have a property called first name, I'm going to pass it on to my content collection. It's kind of like method missing. I'm going to forward it on until somebody can answer the mail on that. All right. Let's see. So it comes with a lot of built-in views that are really cool, but for any sophisticated app like we're all making, you end up having to write a lot of your own views. So this is an example of what a custom view looks like. So if you're not happy with the way that list items are displayed by default, you get this here. So Like, oh, I like when the class is set this way. I don't like it the way SproutCore sets the class. You can do that. Okay, so let me dive back in here. So that's KVC, KVO. That is the thing that if you never adopt this framework, you should still bring into whatever it is you are using because it's really helpful. I already talked about properties, so I'll move on from that. Okay, so now I want to go off script. I don't have anything. I have like a few more slides where I talk about the build process, but I want to just start showing you more code and like step back and say, well, why are things organized the way they are? I'm going to show you a couple of those sample apps, and then I'm just going to dive into the other inbox code, which is as rough and tumble and nasty as it is. That'll give you the idea of what it's like to make one of these apps. All right. So first of all, let's back up a little bit. Every SproutCore app has this clients directory, and the clients are roughly analogous to like what you would have to do to load a new page. So this is all one application, but the contacts app I've been showing you, like that requires a complete page load, and I can't just seamlessly switch from one tab to another to get to the photos demo. So for example, you can see up here, I've got contacts in the URL, and I've got photos over here. So each one of those is a separate client. I don't know a cool web way to communicate that idea, but that's the idea. They're both like top-level path routes for your app. All right. So, okay. Another thing I wanted to say: all of these apps at the top level have this configuration file that controls the build process, and there's all kinds of things that you can do to tweak it and make it work in your environment. When you build one of these apps, it just gets compiled and assembled and minified into just a static JavaScript file, static HTML files. And so, but you have a lot of control over how that happens, what prefixes get set. Let's see if there's, this one may not have, okay, well, you can turn off minification, all kinds of stuff like that. All right, but so most of the interesting stuff comes in these app directories. So let's look let's look at the contacts app, since that's where we're most comfortable starting out. Okay, so there's the model, view, controller folders. I've shown you what those are all about. That's pretty self-explanatory what goes in there. This core file, so every SproutCore app has, like, this is where all the code that is really specific to your application should go. So it's not about the model. This is all the for example, I use the core object. I have a series of functions that wrap AJAX calls and do a couple things that our server is expecting to have to like authenticate you and things like that. So it's the kind of stuff, it's just a good place to put that kind of utility code. And there's a couple things that SproutCore expects to see there. So this is, you don't need this anymore with 1.0, so just pay no attention to the man behind the counter. Fixtures get loaded in the main file here. So, okay, so the fixtures object actually, it gets referenced here. Oh, I'm pointing like you can see what I'm pointing at. It gets referenced here, but they actually get loaded here. So all it is a JSON of contacts. So contacts in this app, they have whatever you tell them. They have whatever properties you say they have. All right, so I showed you the body.html file. This is kind of what that glues everything together. This is the main view of your app. But I didn't talk about this folder that it's in, English.lproj. So the framework supports localization out of the box, and English.lproj is like the default localized version. So so that's most of the code. Usually, most of the Vue stuff lives in lproj, and you essentially are, if you create like Spanish.lproj, you are overriding stuff that's in English lproj. But the default is English because we love English. So like the generator creates this file for you that you can start using for localization. I haven't tried to localize other inbox yet, so I don't have a lot to say about that, except I'm really glad it's there when I need it. We talked about models and views. It includes, the framework includes support as a testing engine that works pretty well. I haven't used it yet because I've been so busy just learning the framework that I haven't gone back to write the test, but I assure you I plan to do that. This app doesn't have, but I'll show you some examples of tests later, but that should be familiar for anybody who's used the JavaScript testing framework. All right, so that's the basic layout of how these apps are structured. Does anybody have any questions about the layout? All right, I'm going to keep on driving then. So let's look at a different application. Let's look at this Photos app. So we got a collection of folders over here and a collection of photos, and this is more like the app that I've built, where it's more of a deeper object graph. It's like things containing things containing things. So let's actually edit one of these objects. So it's all this fancy spinning around magical stuff. Change this. I kind of like this one. You could change the size of things. Looks like these guys aren't playing along though. Anyway, so you can drag objects around, drag these photos around, make a new folder. Okay, I don't want this picture. Actually, should go in my new untitled folder. So there it is. Awesome trip, etc. Okay, so that's the basic idea. It's really a photo organizer. It doesn't have a whole lot of editing capabilities, but it whets the palate, whets your appetite. So let's actually look at the code for that. So this is an example of a more sort of intense app. But I'm hoping, the point I'm trying to make by showing you this is it's actually not that much code. And so you get a lot of behavior, all that drag and drop stuff. You're not going to see a lot here to turn that on. That just comes with the framework because it's such a common proposition. That stuff bugs me. Okay, so the album controller, it's bound to whichever, you got to have a Photos master controller. I mean, that looks very familiar. That's exactly the same pattern that we've already seen. Actually, let me close up some of these windows here. Okay. Things get a little more interesting in the details controller. Right? So you got another content binding. Now we need something. We need a property on a controller that doesn't come defined for us out of the box. We need this property count label, which depends on the length, the size of the objects in this collection and which object is selected. So as objects are added to the collection or as we change different things, we need to recompute count label. So that's the code that recomputes it. First of all, you always are using key value coding, even if you're accessing your own properties. And that's all. That's pretty straightforward here. That slider that resizes things, it's bound to the photo size property of the photos detail controller here. So I can show you an example of that. So photo. Yeah, so here's the binding down here. So this is all the code you need to turn on that slider. You give it the minimum, maximum size of the steps, and you say, all right, I want you to bind yourself to the photo size property of the detail controller. And that's basically it. And then you can have somewhere else in here, we'll find somebody else who, probably that, whatever the controller is, or the list of photos, somewhere in there, they're binding their photo size value. They're asking to be notified of changes to photo size. And so then they resize them. So in fact, why don't I just show you that, see if we can find that. So there, it's not there. Maybe there's somewhere else in here. I don't want to anger the demo gods too much, but somewhere in here, I can show you later, the size of those pictures, the code that's responsible for drawing the pictures on the screen. As soon as photo size changes, they know to redraw themselves. All right, so moving on here. So here's an example of what the localization, well, it's not even in French. I'll push on from there. Main. So this app, I haven't used the SproutCore database feature where if you have HTML5-like storage capability, it will try and take advantage of that, but that's what some of the setup code here is trying to do. So if I set my browser up properly and all things are working here, those changes I make to the photos should persist. It won't use the fixtures. It will actually load the photos out of my local store, which is pretty cool. Okay. tests here. All right. The last thing I wanted to show you here, or some of the stuff that you do get out of the box. I mean, this styling isn't super amazing, but you're just going to create your own styling anyway. But I think that's one of the things that is on the roadmap to improve later on down the road. But you get buttons, different kinds of buttons, checkboxes, and it will try and use like native, cooler versions of some of this stuff. I think there's something so you'll get better looking web checkboxes if you're in Safari. That's showing up there. Get toggle buttons, drop-down menus, and these are all things that you get without having to do all the work of maintaining these things. So we've already seen like a collection view, but one thing that I'm really excited about in 1.0 is these long lists of things. There's a lot of support for incrementally loading them from the server. So up to now, or like I think one of the sort of default answers, if you have a collection of thousands or millions of objects, you would use pagination to get through them, and it just always looked really crappy. Nobody has really good pagination. Well, the framework will only load that subset of objects from the server that you've actually asked for. And you can tell it, all right, I want you to load the first 100 because I know that's what I'm showing first, and go ahead and start fetching the next 100 while the user's looking at it. But if you start scrolling around down here, it won't go back to the server to get more, it'll get just the stuff you're looking at, and it'll only draw those lines. So the version of the app that I wrote without the framework, I would draw all 10,000 mailbox objects and go back to the server to get them, and it was a whole big nightmare. So I only have a little bit of time left. I want to dive into showing you my code, which I know, obviously a lot better. So here's an example of like something that, is putting food on my table. Okay, so first of all, we ended up putting so much stuff into that application object that I split it out into these separate files. I'm sure there's a way better way of doing it. I'm not showing you an example of good SproutCore code. I'm just showing you working SproutCore code that we charge money for. So, okay, so like, I think it would be most comfortable, interesting to start with a model object. So some of this stuff I'm showing you ended up getting written into the framework. So even this is more work than you'd really have to do. But I should load up the app. I'll do that in the background. So basically, other inbox, we help manage email overload. The only reason I'm showing you this is just so you understand the object graph. The user has a series of folders that'll appear over here. Each folder has mailboxes in it. Each mailbox has a bunch of messages. That's the only reason I'm showing it to you there. Okay, so what I'm showing you here is what is the code to make one of these folders work. Okay, so the big deal method in the folder is folders have this property called mailboxes. So if you have a folder selected, the master controller for that mailbox list is going to start asking immediately, give me a list of mailboxes back. So the key here is you never want to block anything because JavaScript is single-threaded. So this whole big chunk of code, which needs to be refactored, it's terrible, I'm embarrassed to show it to you. The whole point of it is it needs to return something right away. So that whole big chunk of code, which we'll step through, the whole point of it is fire off an AJAX request in the background and return something right away. So initially, it's going to return brackets. And we have to do some stuff to go behind the 0.9 frameworks back that you don't have to do. But what I want you to remember is it returns right away. So the run loop keeps going. It feels fluid and nice for the user. So all this other stuff is involved with constructing that AJAX request. I have folders know whether they're loading or not, so that we don't end up trying to fire off multiple requests over and over again. I have different behavior if this folder has never been clicked on before. We do one kind of request to the server where we ask for every object that the user needs to know about. But whereas if this is a differential update, like you've been clicking around and you come back to the inbox, then I only want to show you, the things that have changed since the last time you looked. That's what all this helper code here is about. And so, here's something that might be familiar to you if you're from the Cocoa world. Since we are doing some things behind SproutCore's back with this mailboxes value property, we're not using key value coding. The reason it's okay is because we trigger the observers ourselves directly by saying, all right, we're about to change mailboxes and do some quick stuff. All right, we did change it. So then you can recompute this value. So this gets fired. This is an on-success handler for that AJAX call. So like, we fired off some data. We know at some point later, once it gets parsed and brought back to us, we're going to want to show it. So then the server, all the server's responsible for doing is looking at the last time you were updated. Okay, you have an inbox folder that's current as of 10 minutes ago. I want to construct a list of objects to create, update, or delete that you need to know about since 10 minutes ago. And we have a lot of tortured SQL to do that, and I'm hoping something like CouchDB will help me make all that easier. That's a different topic. All right, so I think I have like less than 5 minutes. So I don't want to. I'm ready for questions.
Okay, SproutCore unit testing.
Okay, it does have unit testing. I'll bring that up while we're talking. I'll show it to you. I can't remember. I'll show you later. It does. I don't want to mess. I'm going to screw it up. I'm nervous. It does. It has a unit testing framework. It's easy. They're easy to write, easy to run.
So they say you can't trust somebody until they can say 3 things that aren't great about a particular framework. Oh, so what are your? You're
right. I'm sorry. I do have that. I had those slides at the end. I totally forgot. Yeah. It's a really steep learning curve right now. That's the #1 obstacle to it. I mean, it's been rewritten so drastically. Like, I've been working on this for a year. I feel like I have a lot to, I would have a hard time teaching it to you. I was mentored by one of the core committers, Eric Ocean. So that's the only reason I've been able to get this far. That's the #1. #2, I think the binding stuff, it's very cool, and I'm making it sound like it's not as easy to wrap your mind around. It could be easier to, there's some constants involved with setting up bindings that seem very magical to me that I don't understand. And third, frankly, it's an open source project, but Apple employs a lot of the people that work on it. And so, I mean, there's other projects, let's just speak in general. That's a situation you were familiar with in the open source world. We all own it and can contribute to it, but real progress is somewhat constrained by the agenda of a large company that's a vested interest. I still think it's great. I'm going to use it everywhere, but you are somewhat chaining yourself to their star if you do that. Is that sort of suspicious enough? All right.
I trust you.
Cool. All right. So I'm getting the wrap up. So I do want to make sure I have to say some thank yous to Eric Ocean and Charles Jolie. They're the core committers. They helped me prepare this and gave me a lot of good things to talk about. And if you do have any questions, you can email me or talk to me on Twitter or afterward. And thank you very much.